the first thing I felt was the cold. It was a deep, bone-aching cold that seeped through the thin cotton of my pajamas, and I was shivering so violently my teeth chattered. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind a fog of white noise and the phantom echo of a car horn. Then, I opened my eyes and I was on the floor. The roadwood floor of the hallway outside my childhood bedroom. I was 9 years old that I pushed myself up, my palms flat against the rough, familiar grain of the wood. My hands were small. My fingers were stubby and childish. I looked down at myself, at the worn-out pajamas with the faded cartoon cat on the front, pajamas I hadn't worn in 20 years. A choked, ragged sob escaped my throat. I was 9. The night of the birthday party. The night of the grand announcement. From inside the room, the rmth of the party, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, felt like a distant, unreachable sun. I could hear my parents' voices, my father's booming laughter, my mother's ruefully modulated, socialite hum. But the voice that cut through the noise, that sharpened the cold into a blade of ice in my chest, was hers. She was just so clumsy, Mommy, my sister, Eleanor, was saying, her voice dripping with practiced, cloying sweetness. She tripped on her own feet and spilled punch all over Aunt Roll's dress. I tried to catch her, but she's so much bigger than me. She looked like such a thing. I felt so embarrassed for you. It was a lie. The simplest, most elegant lie she had ever told. The first of many. The memory of the actual moment flooded back, violent and bright. I hadn't tripped. Eleanor had stuck her foot out, a tiny, deliberate move that only I had seen, and my own momentum had sent me sprawling. The red punch had flown in a perfect arc, drenching Aunt Roll's silk gown. And I had just lain there, a 9-year-old in a too-big dress, the center of a nightmare of horrified residential and muttered disapproval. I watched my 9-year-old self stand up, my cheeks flaming, the tears already welling. I didn't trip, I had said, my voice so small. She tripped me. My parents' faces had gone cold. Disappointed. My father had sighed, a heavy sound of exasperation. My mother had fixed me with a look that could curdle milk. That's enough, Lily. We don't lie. We don't make up stories. Go to your room and think about what you've done. We will discuss this in the morning. After our guests have gone. But the worst party, the party that had haunted me for over 2 decades, the party that echoed in my skull now, was Eleanor's final act. As I'd shuffled from the room, defeated, I'd heard her whisper to my mother, "It's okay, Mommy. I'll share my room with her when she's ready to apologize." Share her room. I had slept on the floor in the corner of Eleanor's enormous, princess-themed bedroom for the next 8 years. A punishment for a crime I didn't commit. Standing in the cold hallway now, the sound of that whisper from my childhood, and the sound of my own bitter, dying gasp from my previous life, clashed in my head. I remembered the feeling of my own blood, hot and sticky on my hands, the metal of the car door handle dented from the impact. I remembered the face of the man who had pulled me from the wreckage, his eyes full of pity, the EMT shouting, a flurry of activity over a dying woman nobody really read about. And I remembered the detached look on Eleanor's face as the police asked her questions at the hospital. I was her sister. Her own sister. The one she had pushed out of the family at 16, the one she had worked so tirelessly to make look unstable, ungrateful, and wrong. My blood sang with a cold fury that was entirely at odds with my small, 9-year-old frame. This was not a chance to fix things. This was a chance to do things right. To be ruder. To win. Pushing myself to my feet, I walked back into the grand living room. I didn't shuffle. I didn't look at the floor. I stood at the edge of the group of chattering adults, all of them trying to pretend the scene with the spilled punch hadn't happened. Eleanor, a perfect little doll in a pink dress with a satin sash, was standing next to my mother, basking in the afterglow of her successful performance. I didn't even look at her. I looked directly at my mother, my voice clear and steady. "Mommy," I said. "I'm sorry about the punch. It was my fault." The room went quiet. My mother's eyebrows raised in a mix of surprise and smug triumph. Eleanor's smile was a smug little crescent on her face. It was the exact reaction they expected. The obedient, pathetic apology but, I continued, my eyes sweeping the room, landing on a stocky, kind-faced man I recognized from my previous life's business dealings. Mr. Henderson, a close business associate of my father's. "I was trying to get away from the spill because I wanted to show you all my surprise. I was going to save the punch for after." Now my father's eyebrows shot up. He hated surprises, unless they benefited him. "What surprise? It's a drawing, Daddy," I said, my voice soft and full of contrition. "I was going to give it to you after dessert. For the Pa Rudy. I was going to apologize with a drawing. But then I slipped. I looked down at my hands, just as I'd seen Eleanor do 1,000 times. It's in my room. I was so upset I ruined everything. I just wanted to make things right." My mother, always obsessed with Ape Rancis, clutched at the peace offering. "Well, why don't you go get it, Lily? It's a lovely thought. The perfect exit." I left the room, but I didn't go to my room. I went to Eleanor's. Her room was a fortress of pink and glitter, a testament to the favoritism that was so expertly hidden from everyone else's view. I knew every inch of this place. I knew where she hid her jewelry, the one she thought was so cleverly hidden under the loose floor boa RD beneath her vanity that I slid the boa RD aside with practiced ease, the memory of my childhood self doing this exact thing for a different purpose flashing through my mind. I had read this jewelry once, years ago, when I was too young to understand the depth of her malice. I had taken it to my parents, hoping for vindication. They'd called me a thief and a liar, claiming I had made the whole thing up. It had been one of the many nails in the coffin of my childhood. I pulled it out, a slender book with a tiny lock. I didn't need the key. The lock was just for show. I opened it to a page from last week. Her handwriting was childish, but the words were poisoned. Lily is so dumb. She's such a freak. She's not like the rest of us. She doesn't belong. I hate her. I wish she'd just go away. I didn't need to read more. I took the jewelry, walked back out into the hallway, and with a gasp that was half shock, half a performance of my own, I pretended to trip over the exact same floorboard I had just replaced. I went down hard, my shoulder hitting the floor with a loud thump. I cried out, a real cry of pain that made my eyes water. The jewelry flew from my hands, skidding across the hallway. "Lily." My mother's voice was sharp with annoyance. She didn't like her children making scenes. The guests' chatter died down again. My father came to the doorway, his face creased with a frown. "What is all this?" he demanded. That I was sitting on the floor, holding my elbow, my face a mask of pain and surprise. I pointed at the jewelry. I was just getting my drawing, I whimpered, letting a tear roll down my cheek. I tripped. My mother strode over, her heels clicking on the hard wood. She bent to pick up the jewelry, a frown on her face. "What is this?" "This isn't your drawing." She opened it. Her eyes flicked across the page. Her face, pale and composed, was a canvas for a slow, right-ling transformation. The blood drained from her cheeks. Her mouth opened, then closed. A strangled sound, somewhere between a gasp and a moan, came from her throat. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother speechless. Her head snapped up, her eyes locking onto Eleanor, who had followed her out into the hall. Eleanor's face was a perfect mask of confusion, but there was a flicker of terror in her eyes. She was too young to have Leah Rened to fully control her fear. Or, what is it, Mommy? She asked, her voice sweet at my father. His curiosity, now fully piqued by his wife's bizarre reaction, took the diary from her hand. He read the entry. His face, which had been a mask of annoyed impatience, went stone cold. It was the look he got when a business deal went wrong, cold and calculating. He read it again, his eyes narrowing. He looked at Eleanor, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. A flicker of something that wasn't blind adoration that I had lit the first spark. I wasn't done. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The guests were trying not to stare, but they were all listening. My mother's mask of social perfection was cracking. She snatched the diary back from my father, her movements jerky. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice high and strained. "A child's nonsense." "Is it?" I said, my voice trembling with just the right amount of hurt. "She's always saying mean things to me, Mommy. When you're not around. This is just her diary. She says worse things to my face." "I do not." Eleanor shrieked, her composure finally cracking. Her voice was too loud, too shrill. "She's a liar. She lies all the time." "I would never." "Well, then what is this?" my father asked, his voice dangerously soft. He pointed to the diary. Eleanor's eyes root around, looking for an escape. "That's not what it means. You don't understand." I was mad because she broke my doll. It was in the moment. It was just venting, Daddy. "So you do hate me," I said softly, my voice really a whisper, but crying in the silent hallway. I looked down at my own hands, the picture of wounded innocence. "You just said it. And you don't even know what you said." It was a cheap shot, a move I'd Leah Rened from her, but it was effective. My father's eyes were on Eleanor, and they were no longer warm. My mother was flustered. The entire tone of the parody, the sanctity of their perfect family, had been shattered. My father, ever the pragmatist, looked over at Mr. Henderson, who was witnessing the entire scene. "I apologize for this," he said, his voice tight. "A little family misunderstanding." Mr. Henderson gave a tight, uncomfortable nod. He wouldn't look at my father. The damage was done. The perfect family portrait was now a surrealist painting. But this was only the beginning. I knew I had to finish this. I had to make sure the weight of what I knew would follow them. As my mother ushered Eleanor back into the room, muttering apologies to the guests, I stayed in the hallway, sitting on the floor. My father was still standing there, his knuckles white on the door frame. "Daddy," I said softly. He turned, his eyes tired and a little bit suspicious. "What is it, Lily?" "I know this isn't the right time to ask," I said, my voice small and earnest, "but I have a question I've been wanting to ask for a long time. Why is my room in the basement and Eleanor's room is so big? I always wondered." It was a question I had never dared to ask before. I was 9, and for 9 years, I had accepted the basement room, the one that was cold and had a window well instead of a view, as my due. But now I knew the answer. I had always known the answer, I just hadn't been ready to face it. I was the mistake. The child who had taken the place of the real daughter they'd always wanted. My father's face flickered with something, maybe a memory, maybe a ghost of guilt. He looked at me, his brow furrowed. It's just a room, Lily. You're too young to understand space and practicality. You can tell me," I whispered, looking up at him with wide, wet eyes. "I'm a big girl. I know I can be clumsy and messy sometimes. Maybe it's because you don't really want me here." My voice was cracking, a tear sliding down my cheek. I was using every trick I had learned in my past life, the art of subtle manipulation, the power of vulnerability. My father's face fell. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the man he could have been, the man who might have loved me if he hadn't been so blinded by the brilliant son of his real daughter. That's not true, Lily, he said. You're my daughter. But why do you keep me down there? I pressed, my voice still childlike but my eyes holding a depth of sorrow no child should possess. I want to be any ARU. I want to be a part of the family. Like Eleanor. She's always so close to you. She gets everything she wants. The air grew thick with the weight of my words. My father looked at me, then back toward the living room, where the sounds of the party were slowly resuming, a thin veneer of normalcy. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face. What do you want from me? He finally asked. I shook my head, the perfect image of a child who just wants to be loved. I just want to know why. Why I'm different. He didn't answer. He just looked at me, his jaw tight, and then walked away. I sat in the hallway, watching the door to the party room close. I hadn't won. Not yet. But I had planted a seed. A seed of doubt. I had made them question her. I had made them see her as a liar. And I had made them look at me, truly look at me, and see the child they had been too busy to notice. I got up, feeling a cold resolve settle in my bones. I walked back to my room in the basement, the one with the small, grated window that looked out onto the driveway. I stood in the middle of the room, shivering in the cold. I looked at my hands, the same hands I had watched bleed out in the wreckage of a life ruined by a family who had never wanted me. I had been their dirty little secret, the adopted one, the other daughter, a placeholder for a child who would never come. And now, I had come back. Not to fix my life, but to burn theirs to the ground. I smiled. It was a grim, joyless smile. I had sta root with the diary. But that was only a splinter. I had a whole blueprint of their future sins to use against them. And I would use every single one. The weeks following the birthday party were a masterclass in carefully crafted chaos. My father, Benjamin, began to look at me differently. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a flicker of something resembling curiosity. He'd catch my eye across the breakfast table and give a small, hesitant nod. My mother, Ca Rolene, on the other hand, was a tightly coiled spring of contained resentment. She never directly said anything, but she'd find small ways to remind me of my place. I was given the wrong size uniform for school, told it was an honest mistake. My portion of dinner was always slightly smaller than Eleanor's. It was petty, cruel, and absolutely perfect. It was exactly the kind of thing I could use. Eleanor, for her party, had become a shadow. She was no longer the radiant, golden princess. She was subdued, her eyes rooting nervously to me at every opportunity. The diary incident had been a public humiliation, a crack in her perfectly polished armor. She tried to start a whisper campaign against me at school, telling kids I was a liar and a thief. I knew she was doing it. I heard the whispers in the hallways. But I was prepared. I waited. I watched. I knew she had a new secret. In my previous life, I'd found out about it years later. A boy named Daniel, a friend of a friend, had been her first real crush. She'd been obsessed with him, but he'd never liked her back. In the old timeline, she'd framed me for stealing a necklace from him and had gotten me suspended. It was one of my realized, official punishments. This time, I wasn't going to be the victim. I saw the opportunity rise during a school project. We were working in groups, and Daniel and Eleanor were in the same group. Eleanor was laying it on thick, trying to impress him with her charm. I watched from the other side of the room, pretending to be completely engrossed in my own work. I waited until the teacher left the room, a moment of quiet rebellion that I took a deep breath and walked over to the group. I didn't look at Eleanor. I only spoke to Daniel. Daniel, I said, my voice soft and friendly. Can I borrow you for a second? I need help with the materials list for our project. Mrs. Davies said you were the one to ask. He looked surprised, but he was a polite boy. Sure, Lily. Eleanor's face went red. She doesn't need your help, she snapped. She can ask the teacher. It's okay, Eleanor, Daniel said, a slight frown on his face. It'll just be a second. I led him a few feet away to my desk. I'm sorry to pull you away, I said, my voice conspiratorial and low. But I have to tell you something. I don't know if you've noticed, but Eleanor's been saying some weird things about me. She's been telling people I stole things. Daniel looked confused. Really? Yeah, I said, nodding. I'm kind of used to it. But she's been saying things about you, too. About how you're simple, and that you're not as smart as the other kids. She's been telling everyone that you're stupid. I think she's making up a rumor about you stealing something from the school. She said she was going to tell the teacher that you took some of the ART supplies. His face turned white. The betrayal was clear on his face. Why would she do that? I don't even talk to her. I don't know, I said, shaking my head, my face the picture of confusion. She's been different lately. Ever since her birthday, she's been really mean to everyone. I think she might be trying to get attention. I gave him a moment to process, then I said, listen, just be careful. If she tells the teacher something, just say you were with me the whole time. I'll vouch for you. He nodded, his eyes wide. Thanks, Lily. I mean it. I smiled, a small, innocent smile. It's no problem. It was a simple lie, but it was a powerful one. I had just turned her greatest weapon against her. In the original timeline, she had used this exact trick to get me suspended, and I'd been too naive to defend myself. Now, I had planted the seed of doubt in Daniel's mind about her. He would be watching her. He would be wary of her. And then, I waited for the dominoes to fall that a few days later, the teacher called a meeting. The theft of the supplies was a big deal. The school's policy on theft was strict. Mrs. Davies, a stern woman with a permanent frown, stood at the front of the class. There has been a theft in this class, she announced. A set of expensive ART markers has gone missing. We have a pretty good idea who took them. The class held its breath. I could feel Eleanor's eyes boring into the back of my head. I knew what was coming. Eleanor, could you come up here? Mrs. Davies said, her voice cold. Eleanor went pale. Her face was a mask of panic. What me? I didn't take anything. It was her. She pointed a shaking finger at me. She took them. She's the one who steals things. Eleanor, the teacher said, her voice sharp enough. The truth is, the markers were found in your locker. You were seen putting them in there by another student, who reported the incident to the office. The class erupted in gasps and whispers. Eleanor's face was a study in shock and horror. She was stammering, trying to find an excuse. No, that's not true. That's a lie. I was set up. You were set up by who, Eleanor? The teacher asked, folding her arms up by her. Eleanor shrieked, pointing at me again. Mrs. Davies looked at me. Lily, do you have anything to say? I shook my head, my eyes wide and innocent. I don't know what she's talking about, Mrs. Davies. I was just trying to finish my project. I didn't see anything. I had done my homework. I knew the markers were in her locker. I'd planted them there before school sta route. And I'd been there at the right time to make sure a kid, one who was always trying to get into the good graces of the teachers, saw her doing it. I had woven a web of subtle, ironclad circumstances. The principal was called. My parents were called. I watched from a distance as my father, the mighty Benjamin Blackwood, was forced to sit in the principal's office with his perfect daughter, who was now a thief. He didn't look happy that night. The house was tense. My father was pacing the living room, his face thunderous. My mother was on the phone, trying to spin the narrative, probably to save face with the other parents. Eleanor was sobbing in her room, the sounds of her tears a symphony of sweet, sweet victory. I sat on the stairs, listening. I knew I had to capitalize on this moment. Lily, my father's voice called out. Come here. I walked into the living room. He was standing by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. This is a mess, he said, running a hand through his hair. Your sister is a mess. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him with my 9-year-old eyes, full of a sorrow I didn't have to fake. I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't mean to make you upset. He looked at me, his eyes heavy. You didn't do anything wrong, Lily. He sighed. I'm tired. I'm tired of all this drama. I walked over to him and placed a small hand on his arm. It was a gesture I had never dared to make in my first life, a gesture of solidarity. I know, Daddy. I'm here for you. He looked down at me, his face softening. For a moment, I saw a hint of the father he could have been. Thank you, Lily. That night, after the house was quiet, I sat in my cold basement room. I pulled out the old, worn picture of my real parents, the ones who had abandoned me when I was 2 years old. I had found it years ago, hidden in a box of my baby things. I had always looked at it with sadness, with a sense of loss. Now I looked at it with a cold, calculating focus. I knew the truth now, thanks to a slip of the tongue from a drunken lawyer at a party years from now, in my past life. My parents had abandoned me, but they hadn't been my real parents. They were the people who had stolen me. I was the real heiress to a fortune, the descendant of the Wentworth family, a dynasty that was even more powerful than the Blackwoods. I had been stolen as a baby, a pawn in a custody battle that had gone wrong, and given to the Blackwoods, who had never wanted me. They didn't even know the truth. They just knew I was a problem child, the one who didn't fit in. They had no idea that I was the only thing that could save them from the financial ruin that was coming for them in a few years. The company my father was so proud of was a house of cards. A hostile takeover was looming in the distant future, and he was too arrogant to see it. He was going to lose everything, and he was going to take us all down with him. But I could stop it. I had the knowledge. I had the blueprint. And now, I had the leverage. That I looked at the photo of my real family, the Wentworths. I was going to meet them. I was going to claim my birthright. And I was going to make my new parents pay. The first step was to get the evidence. I knew where the adoption papers were kept. My father's study. It was off limits, but I was a ghost in this house. I knew the layout. I knew the security code. I knew the hiding spot behind the false panel in the fireplace. The next morning, while my parents were at work and Eleanor was at school, I made my move. I crept into the study, my heart pounding in my chest. I found the false panel and slid it open. Inside, there was a fireproof safe. I knew the combination. I had seen my father open it once, years ago, when he had been looking for a document for a business deal. He'd recited the numbers under his breath, and I had stored them away in my memory, a piece of information I had filed away until it became useful. I dialed the combination. The lock clicked open. I was in. Inside, there was a stack of documents. I rifled through them until I found the file. It was a slim, manila folder, labeled Adoption Records. I pulled it out, my hands trembling that I opened the file. Inside was a birth certificate. My birth certificate. My real name was Lily Wentworth. My parents were Arthur and Marga Red Wentworth. There was a photo of them, a beautiful couple with warm smiles. They looked kind. They looked loving. They looked like they had never stolen a child in their lives. And the date of birth. It matched my own that I wasn't adopted at birth. I was kidnapped. I was stolen. I had been taken from my real parents, who had died in a suspicious car accident shortly after. A car accident that had left me an orphan, a convenient orphan for the Blackwoods to take in. A suspicion I had long harbored, and now had the document to confirm that I pulled out my phone, the one I had been secretly using for weeks. I took a photo of the birth certificate. I took photos of all the pages in the file. I even took photos of the safe itself, of my father's hand on the lock. I had the proof. And I was going to use it that I put everything back exactly as I found it. I closed the safe, slid the panel shut, and crept out of the study. I felt a cold fire burning in my veins. I was no longer a child. I was a weapon. And my former parents had no idea they were about to be destroyed. Later that night, I was lying in bed, the sound of my heart thrumming in my ears, when the door to the basement opened. It was my father. His face was unreadable in the dim light. Lily, he said, his voice gruff. I've been thinking about what you said. About the basement. About why you're different. I sat up, my heart pounding. Yes, Daddy. He walked over to my small bed and sat down on the edge, the old springs groaning under his weight. He looked at me, his eyes heavy with a sadness I had never seen in his face before. The truth is, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, you're not our real daughter. I had expected him to tell me the truth. I had planned for it. But hearing the words, spoken in his voice, was like a physical blow. The tears that filled my eyes were reeled up. I know, I whispered. I've always known. But why? Why did you keep me? He was silent for a long moment. I saw his face contort with something that looked almost like grief. It's complicated, Lily, he finally said. You weren't supposed to be here. We were trying to protect you. Protect me from what? I asked, my voice small and red. I was playing the part, but I was also genuinely shaken. He shook his head, looking away. From the people who wanted to hurt you. The Wentworths. They were bad people. They had enemies. We thought we could give you a better life. Lies. It was all lies. He was covering his tracks. I'm glad you told me, I whispered, my voice trembling. Thank you, Daddy. He looked back at me, his eyes wet. He reached out and patted my hand, a clumsy, awkward gesture. We'll talk more about this later. For now, just go to sleep. He left, and I was alone with the truth. My father had just told me that I was the daughter of a family he had destroyed. He had tried to paint himself as a savior, but I knew the truth. I had the files. I knew about the car accident. I knew he had orchestrated it all. He had stolen me, taken me from my real family, and then had them killed to cover his tracks. I was going to make him pay. And I was going to start by exposing his lies. One by one. Brick by brick. I was going to make him watch everything he loved crumble to dust. And I was going to be the one holding the sledgehammer. The truth had a weight to it, a gravity that pulled everything in my orbit into a new, terrifying alignment. The cold basement room was no longer just a punishment, it was the cradle of my revenge. I began my campaign in Heiress, operating with the quiet, chilling precision of a surgeon. I had knowledge, secrets they thought were buried so deep, they'd never see the light of day. A week after the diarrhea incident, I noticed a shift. My mother, C.A. Rowleen, was more attentive to me. It was subtle, a sidelong glance here, a concerned question there. It was the behavior of a woman trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't know existed. She'd catch me reading in the living room and ask, "Are you enough, Lily?" A simple question, but it was an acknowledgement I had never received before. Then, the dinner invitations sta route. "We're having the Hendersons over for dinner next week, Lily. You'll join us." My father's question was an order disguised as an invitation. He wanted me to be seen. He wanted to present the picture of a repaired, happy family. I knew he was trying to salvage his reputation after Eleanor's public disgrace. But I played along. I wore the dress my mother bought me, a pale blue thing that made me look like a ghost, but I smiled, I answered questions politely, I was the picture of a well-adjusted child. And then I'd find a way to drop a bombshell. Mr. Henderson was a portly, loud man who enjoyed the finer things in life and had a habit of letting loose after a few glasses of wine. I knew, from my past life, that he was a terrible gossip. He would be my most valuable asset. At one of the dinners, with the guests settled and the conversation flowing, I waited for my moment. My father was telling a story about a successful business deal, basking in the glow of his own brilliance, and we closed the deal on the Pierce acquisition, my father bragged, taking a sip of his wine. They didn't see it coming. It was a clean, beautiful takeover. I looked at Mr. Henderson, my eyes wide and innocent. "Daddy, I'm confused. If we took over Pierce's company, does that mean we owe his family money? I read in one of your old files about a debt." The room went quiet. My father's face froze. His knuckles were white on the stem of his glass. "What file, Lily?" my mother asked, her voice sharp. "I found it in Daddy's study," I said, my voice a sweet, confused whisper. It was a SCA re-letter. It said we had to pay back $5 million Rs or they'd take our house. I didn't understand it. Mr. Henderson's eyes were wide. He was a man who dealt in numbers, and the number 5 million had caught his attention. My father's face was a mask of controlled panic. I had just dropped the biggest secret in his portfolio. The Pierce deal, which everyone thought was a triumph, was actually a disaster. He had over-leveraged the company to acquire it, and the debt was a ticking time bomb. Mr. Henderson, his curiosity now a palpable force, leaned forward. "A debt, Benjamin? I wasn't aware the Pierce acquisition had such encumbrances. You told us it was a clean deal." My father stammered, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "It's a misunderstanding, Henry. There's a clause in the contract. It's a standard business thing. It's not a misunderstanding, is it, Daddy?" I whispered, my voice trembling with false fear. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say anything. I just didn't want us to lose our home." The damage was done. The secret was out. The conversation pivoted, but the seed of suspicion was planted. My father had lost a crucial piece of his armor. He was vulnerable. The next day, my mother confronted me in my room. She looked tired, worn down by the constant pressure. "Lily, what you said at dinner last night I need to know. How do you know about the Pierce deal? It's not something you should be concerned with." I looked up at her, my eyes wide. "I found the papers in Daddy's study, Mommy. I was looking for a book to read. I didn't mean to pry. Is he in trouble?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's complicated. Your father made a bad investment." "So the money is gone?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I don't know, Lily. I don't know anything anymore," she said, her voice suddenly cracking. She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the woman behind the mask. A woman who was trapped, who had married a man for his money and status, and was now facing the loss of both. This was the crack I needed to widen. Eleanor had always been my mother's favorite because she was a reflection of her own ambitions. But now, in the face of true disaster, I could offer her something more valuable: loyalty. The family was fractured, and I could be the one to hold the pieces together. Over the next few weeks, I made a deliberate effort to be my mother's confidant. I would sit with her in the garden, listening to her talk about her worries. I would bring her tea when she was stressed. I became her quiet, unassuming ally. One afternoon, I found her crying in the living room. My father was in his study, making phone calls that were growing more frantic and less promising. Are you okay, Mommy? I asked, sitting down next to her on the sofa. It's all falling apart, Lily, she whispered, wiping her eyes. Your father. He's been making some terrible mistakes. We might lose everything. I put a small hand on hers. It's okay, Mommy. We'll be okay. I won't let us lose everything. She looked at me, surprised by the strength in my voice. You're just a child, Lily. You can't help. I know, but I can be here for you, I said, my voice firm. That it was a small gesture, but it was a chink in her armor. She was seeing me not as the problem child, but as a source of comfort. I had become the daughter she could rely on, the one who wasn't causing the chaos. Meanwhile, Eleanor was unraveling. The theft incident had been a major blow to her standing at school. The whispers followed her everywhere. Her friends had sta route to distance themselves. She was no longer the golden girl, she was the girl who got caught stealing. And she knew who was responsible, even if she couldn't prove it. That I watched her from across the dinner table, her eyes red-rimmed, her food untouched. My mother was too distracted by the financial mess to notice her. My father was too consumed with saving his company to pay attention to anything else. Eleanor finally snapped one evening. She slammed her fork down on the table, her face twisted in anger. Why are you doing this to me? She screamed, her voice cracking. Why are you trying to ruin my life? My mother looked up, sta riled. Eleanor, what are you talking about, her? Eleanor shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. She's the one who planted those markers in my locker. She's the one who told Daniel that I said those things about him. She's been poisoning everyone against me. I looked at her, my eyes wide and innocent. Eleanor, I don't know what you're talking about. I've been trying to help you. I told Mommy that you were just having a hard time adjusting to the new school. I defended you. It was a masterstroke. I had positioned myself as the peacemaker, the one who was trying to hold the family together. And Eleanor, in her desperation, looked like the aggressor. My father's voice cut through the tension like a whip. Eleanor, sit down and eat your dinner. We have enough problems without you manufacturing more. But Daddy, I said. Sit down, my father repeated, his voice cold. We will not have any more of this drama. You've caused enough trouble already. Eleanor's face crumpled. She looked at my mother for support, but my mother just shook her head, her eyes tired and defeated. Eleanor sat down, her body trembling with rage, her eyes shooting daggers at me. But the damage was done. The tables had turned. I was no longer the outcast. I was the peacemaker. And Eleanor was the unstable one. The next day, I put phase 2 of my plan into action. I needed to find the Wentworths. I knew their last known address from the adoption papers. It was a townhouse in the Upper East Side. A place of old money and ancient secrets. I waited until my mother was out at a charity luncheon and my father was at the office. Then, I called a cab. The driver looked at me, a 9-year-old girl in a school uniform, with a skeptical expression. Are you sure this is the right address, kid? He asked. Yes, sir, I said, my voice polite. It's my aunt's house. The drive was a blur of familiar city streets, places I had only ever glimpsed from the back of my father's car. When the cab pulled up in front of a stately brownstone, my heart was hammering in my chest. I paid the driver with money I had saved from my lunch allowance over the months, walked up the steps, and rang the bell that a maid answered the door. She looked down at me with a puzzled frown. "Can I help you, miss? I'm here to see the Wentworths," I said, my voice clear and steady. "My name is Lily. Lily Wentworth." The maid's eyes widened. She looked at me as if she had seen a ghost. She read inside and returned a few moments later with an older woman, elegant and composed, with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. "Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice worried. "My name is Lily Wentworth," I repeated. "I believe you knew my parents. Arthur and Margaret Wentworth." The woman's face went pale. She stepped back, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's you. It's really you." She was my grandmother. Eleanor Wentworth. The matriarch of the Wentworth dynasty. She pulled me into a fierce embrace, her body shaking with sobs. "Where have you been?" she cried. "We thought you were dead. We looked for you for years. The Blackwoods told us you had died in the accident." I looked up at her, my eyes wet. "They lied," I said, my voice trembling. "They took me. They kept me. They told me my real family was gone." The truth of it hung in the air between us, a heavy, terrible weight. My grandmother led me inside, her arm wrapped protectively around my shoulders. The townhouse was a museum of old wealth, filled with antique furniture, royal paintings, and the quiet, faded grandeur of a family that had once ruled the city. "I need to show you something," my grandmother said, her voice urgent. She led me up the stairs to a private study and pulled out a photo album. It was filled with pictures of my parents, of a young woman who looked just like me, and a man with kind eyes. "This is your mother," she said, pointing to a picture. She was so beautiful. So full of life. "And your father? He was a good man, Lily. The best of us." She flipped the pages, her hands trembling. "When you were taken, everything fell apart. We tried everything. We hired private investigators. We went to the police. But they were powerful, the Blackwoods. They had connections everywhere. They covered their tracks." I looked at the photos, at the faces of the parents I had never known. A cold fury settled in my chest, a fire that burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The Blackwoods had taken everything from me. My family. My identity. My birthright. And they had given me a life of neglect, a life of cold basements and whispered cruelties. "They are going to pay for this," I said, my voice low and steady. "I am going to make sure of it." My grandmother looked at me, her eyes wide. "Lily, they are dangerous. You can't go up against them alone." "I'm not alone," I said, looking at her. "I have you now. And I have the truth." Over the next few weeks, my grandmother and I worked together. She was a force of nature, a brilliant woman who had been biding her time for years, waiting for a chance to strike back at the people who had destroyed her family. We gathered evidence. We called in favors. We built a case against the Blackwoods that was airtight. The financial records were the first domino to fall. I had told my grandmother about the Pierce deal, about the hidden debt that was slowly draining the Blackwood fortune. She had contacts in the banking world, people who could dig up the dirt my father had buried so carefully. It was only a matter of time before the walls route to close in. And when they did, I would be there to watch it all come crashing down. The walls were closing in, and I could feel every brick settling into place. My grandmother, Eleanor Wentworth, had become my anchor, my partner in the quiet war I was waging against the Blackwoods. She was a formidable ally, a woman who had spent years grieving and waiting, and now she had a target for all that pent-up fury that we met in secret, usually in the back of her townhouse, away from prying eyes. She would pour me tea in delicate porcelain cups and lay out documents across the mahogany table like a general planning a siege. "The Pierce acquisition," she said one afternoon, sliding a thick folder toward me. "Your father leveraged everything to make that deal. He used the company as collateral. The debt is due in 6 months. If he can't pay, the bank takes everything." I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the fine print. It was worse than I had imagined. My father had mortgaged the future of his company on a gamble that had gone sour. And now, the reckoning was approaching. "He doesn't know that I know," I said, looking up at my grandmother. "He thinks he still has time." She smiled, a thin, cold smile that mirrored my own. "Then we don't give him time. We accelerate the timeline." The plan was simple and brutal. My grandmother would use her contacts in the financial world to call in a few favors. A rumor here, a whispered warning there. The banks would get nervous. They would start asking questions. And once the questions root, my father's house of cards would collapse. I returned home that evening to find the house in chaos. My father was pacing the living room, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low, frantic growl. My mother was sitting on the sofa, her face pale, a glass of wine trembling in her hand. Eleanor was nowhere to be seen. "Benjamin, what's happening?" my mother asked, her voice sharp with fear. "It's nothing," my father snapped, ending the call. "Just a minor issue. The banks being difficult." "Minor," my mother repeated, her voice rising. "You've been on the phone all day. Our friends calling me, asking questions. They're saying the company is in trouble. They're saying we might lose everything." My father slammed his hand on the table. "I said it's nothing. I will handle it." I watched from the doorway, my heart pounding with a cold, steady satisfaction. The cracks were widening. They were rooting to see each other for who they really were. My mother, the socialite who had married for money, was facing the prospect of poverty. My father, the arrogant businessman, was facing the prospect of failure. I slipped away to my basement room, but I didn't stay there long. I had one more piece of the puzzle to put into place that night. I waited until the house was quiet. Then, I crept up the stairs to my father's study. I knew he had a second safe, a smaller one hidden behind a painting in his office. I had seen him open it once, years ago, when I had been sent to fetch him for dinner. He had been reeless, too distracted by a phone call to notice me watching. I slid the painting aside, revealing the small metal box. I dialed the combination, my fingers steady. The lock clicked open. Inside, there was a stack of documents. A will. A trust fund. A deed to a property in Connecticut. And a letter, yellowed with age, addressed to my father from a law firm that had long since gone out of business. I pulled it out and unfolded it carefully. The letter was dated 20 years ago, a few months before I was born. It was a confirmation of a financial transaction, a payment made to a private investigator. The payment was for information regarding the whereabouts of a child. A child who had been taken from her family. A child whose parents had died in a car accident that had been ruled suspicious. My parents' accident. I read the letter again, my hands trembling. My father had hired an investigator to find me. He had known about me before I was born. He had orchestrated my kidnapping, my parents' death, and my adoption into his family. And he had done it all for money. The Wentworth fortune was massive, and he had wanted a piece of it. But he had never gotten it. The Wentworths had frozen their assets after my parents died, and my father had been left with nothing but a child he didn't want and a secret he had to protect. I took photos of every page with my phone, my hands steady now. I had the final piece of evidence. The smoking gun. The next morning, I called my grandmother. I found the letter, I said, my voice a whisper. He hired a private investigator. He knew about the Wentworths. He orchestrated the whole thing. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, my grandmother's voice, cold and hardy as steel. That monster. He killed my son. He killed my daughter-in-law. And he stole my granddaughter. He did, I said. And now we're going to make him pay. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. My grandmother and I worked tirelessly, coordinating with lawyers, gathering witnesses, building a case that would destroy the Blackwoods once and for all. The evidence was overwhelming. The adoption papers, the letter from the private investigator, the financial records, the testimony of a retired detective who had always suspected foul play. That I went back to my normal life at the Blackwood house, playing the role of the quiet, obedient daughter. I watched my father unravel with every passing day. His phone calls grew more frantic. His temper grew shorter. My mother retreated into her own world, numbing herself with wine and sleeping pills. Eleanor had become a ghost. She moved through the house with her head down, avoiding eye contact. The theft scandal had been the first blow, but the unraveling of her family was the final straw. She had nothing left to hold on to. The golden child was now just a red little girl watching her world fall apart. One evening, I found her sitting in the garden, her knees drawn up to her chest, her eyes red from crying. I hesitated for a moment, then sat down beside her. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice soft. She looked at me, her eyes filled with hate and hurt. "Why are you doing this to us? Why are you destroying our family?" I met her gaze, my expression calm. "I'm not doing anything, Eleanor. Your father did this to himself. He made choices. Bad choices. And now he has to face the consequences." "You're lying," she spat. "You've been plotting against us since your birthday. You're a monster." I smiled, a sad, tired smile. "Maybe I am. But I learned from the best." She flinched, and I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She knew, on some level, that I was right. She had been the monster first. She had tormented me for years, and now I was simply returning the favor. "I'm going to lose everything," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My friends. My school. My home. Everything." I looked at her, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. She was just a child, after all. A product of her environment, a victim of the same family dysfunction that had shaped me. But then I remembered the cold basement room. I remembered the whispers and the lies. I remembered the day she had framed me for the theft, the day she had gotten me suspended, the day she had broken my spirit. "Eleanor," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You were never the victim. You were always the bully. And bullies don't get happy endings." She read at me, her eyes wide with shock. Then, she burst into tears and ran back into the house. I stayed in the garden, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. I felt no satisfaction. Only a cold, quiet resolve. The end was coming, and I was ready. A week later, the storm finally broke. My grandmother filed a lawsuit against the Blackwoods, charging them with kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence was presented to the court, and the media went wild. The Blackwood name, once a symbol of wealth and prestige, became synonymous with scandal and deception. The newspapers ran headlines like "Heiress found after 20 years," "Blackwood Empire crumbles," and "Suspicious deaths linked to high society kidnapping." My father was arrested at the office, led away in handcuffs as his employees watched in stunned silence. My mother was summoned to the police station for questioning. The house was raided, boxes of documents CA write out by federal agents that I watched it all from the window of my basement room, my face expressionless. This was what I had been working Tower Road. This was the moment I had dreamed of since the day I had woken up on the cold hardwood floor. My grandmother came to get me that evening. She stood in the doorway of my room, her eyes filled with tears of joy and relief. "It's over, Lily," she said, opening her arms, "you're free." I walked into her embrace, feeling the warmth of her arms around me. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. I felt loved. I felt like I belonged. But even as I hugged her back, I knew the fight wasn't over. My father's trial was yet to come. The Wentworth fortune, frozen for decades, had to be recovered. And I had to reclaim my identity, my name, my birthright. I pulled back, looking up at my grandmother. "We're not done yet," I said, my voice steady. "There's still work to do." She nodded, her expression fierce. "I know, Lily. And we'll do it together. Every step of the way." We left the Blackwood house that night, and I never looked back. The basement room was empty, the cold walls silent. I had spent 9 years in that house, a prisoner in my own life. Now, I was walking out into the world as a free woman, armed with the truth and the power to shape my own destiny. The Blackwood Empire was in ruins. My father was facing a lifetime in prison. My mother was disgraced, her reputation in tatters. Eleanor was alone, abandoned by the friends who had once flocked to her side. And I was just getting sta root. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens poised over notebooks, cameras clicking in a rhythmic, relentless assault. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood, stale coffee, and the electric hum of anticipation. I sat in the front row, my grandmother's hand wrapped tightly around mine. My back was straight, my chin held high. I was no longer a frightened child in a cold basement. I was Lily Wentworth, and I was about to watch the man who had destroyed my family face justice. My father, Benjamin Blackwood, sat at the defense table, his expensive suit now wrinkled, his face pale and gaunt. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate look. He kept glancing at me, his eyes pleading, sea urging for some sign of mercy. I gave him nothing. Just a cold, steady gaze that held all the pain and fury of 20 years. The prosecution laid out their case with surgical precision. The adoption papers. The letter from the private investigator. The financial records linking my father to the suspicious car accident that had killed my parents. The testimony of a retired detective who had always believed the crash was no accident. "Is it true, Mr. Blackwood, that you hired a private investigator to locate the Wentworth child?" the prosecutor asked, his voice sharp as a blade. My father's lawyer stood up, objecting, but the judge overruled him. My father was forced to answer yes, he said, his voice really a whisper. "I hired an investigator. But I didn't know the details. I was told the child was in danger. I was trying to protect her." "Protect her," the prosecutor repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "By stealing her from her family. By covering up the deaths of her parents, by keeping her in a basement for 9 years." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. My father's face turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness took the stand, each one adding another brick to the wall of evidence against him. The private investigator, now an old man with a guilty conscience, testified that my father had paid him to find me and then to make sure the Wentworths never found out what had happened. The family doctor testified that my parents had been in perfect health before the crash. A mechanic testified that the brakes on their car had been tampered with. By the end of the second week, my mother had taken the stand. She looked nothing like the elegant socialite I remembered. Her hair was gray and unkempt, her eyes hollow. She testified that she had known nothing about the kidnapping, that my father had told her I was a distant relative whose parents had died in a tragic accident. That I believed him, she said, her voice breaking. I trusted him. I never knew the truth. The jury listened, their faces unreadable. But I could see the disgust in their eyes. She was complicit, whether she admitted it or not. She had turned a blind eye to the abuse, to the neglect. She had been a silent partner in my suffering. On the final day of the trial, my father took the stand in his own defense. His voice was trembling, his hands shaking. He tried to paint himself as a victim, a man who had made a terrible mistake but had always tried to do what was right. If I was young, he said, his eyes darting around the courtroom. I made a terrible choice. But I loved Lily. I gave her a home. I gave her a family. I rose from my seat, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't stay silent any longer. That you gave me a basement, I said, my voice clear and steady. You gave me cold nights and empty stomachs. You gave me a sister who tormented me and a mother who looked the other way. You gave me a life of cruelty and neglect. And you took everything from me. My parents. My name. My birthright. The courtroom fell silent. Every eye was on me, a 9-year-old girl with the eyes of a woman who had seen too much. The judge looked at me, his expression softening. That continue, Miss Wentworth, he said. That I looked directly at my father, my gaze unwavering. You stole me because you wanted my family's money. But you never got it. The Wentworths froze their assets, and you were left with nothing but a child you resented. You spent 20 years trying to erase me, but you couldn't. Because I survived. And now, I'm here to take everything back. My father's face crumpled. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. The prosecution rested its case. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Kidnapping. Fraud. Conspiracy to commit murder. My father's face went white as the judge read the sentence, 25 years to life in a federal prison. That he was led away in handcuffs, his eyes still searching for me, still looking for the little girl he had tried so hard to destroy. I watched him go, my heart cold and empty. There was no satisfaction in his defeat. Only a quiet, grim finality. After the trial, my grandmother and I returned to the Wentworth townhouse. The house was quiet, the staff having been given the day off. We sat in the parlor, a fire crackling in the hearth, the warm glow of the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. It's over, Lily, my grandmother said, her voice soft and sad. You can finally start living your life. I looked at her, my eyes filled with tears I had been holding back for weeks. I don't know how to live a normal life, I admitted. I've been so focused on revenge that I don't know who I am without it. She reached out and took my hand. You are Lily Wentworth. You are strong, and you are brave. You survived something that would have broken most people. And now, you have the rest of your life to figure out who you want to be. I nodded, a tear slipping down my cheek. I want to make things right. I want to help other children who have been through what I went through. I want to use my family's fortune to protect them. My grandmother smiled, a warm, proud smile. That is a wonderful idea. And I will be right there beside you, every step of the way. We sat together in the quiet of the parlor, the warmth of the fire surrounding us. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace. The past was behind me. The future was wide open. Over the next few months, I route to rebuild my life. I enrolled in a new school, one where no one knew my story. I made friends, real friends, who liked me for who I was and not for the name I ride. I route therapy, working through the years of trauma I had buried deep inside me. It was harder than I had ever imagined. But every day, I got a little bit stronger. My grandmother and I launched the Wentworth Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting children from abuse and neglect. We used our wealth and influence to fund research, support advocacy groups, and provide resources for families in crisis. It was the most meaningful work I had ever done. One afternoon, I received a letter. It was from Eleanor. She had been living with a distant relative, struggling to adjust to her new reality. The letter was short, the handwriting shaky and uncertain. Lily, I don't know if you'll ever read this, or if you'll even see a re. But I wanted to say I'm sorry. I was cruel to you. I was jealous and mean, and I treated you like you were nothing. I know I can never take back the things I did, but I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to be the kind of person you deserve to have as a sister. I hope one day you can forgive me. Eleanor. I read the letter twice, my emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and throw it away. Part of me wanted to scream. But another part, the part that was slowly healing, felt a flicker of compassion. I didn't respond. Not immediately. But I kept the letter, tucked away in a drawer, a reminder that people could change. A reminder that even the most broken relationships could, with time and effort, begin to mend. 3 years passed. I grew taller, stronger, more confident. I became a voice for the voiceless, a champion for children who couldn't champion themselves. My grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep, her legacy secure in the work we had built together. On the day of her funeral, I stood at her graveside, the wind cold on my face, the sky a pale, washed-out blue. I looked down at the casket, my heart heavy with grief but also filled with gratitude. She had given me a second chance. She had shown me what it meant to be loved. She was a remarkable woman, a voice said beside me. I turned to see Eleanor standing a few feet away, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. I'm sorry for your loss. I nodded, surprised to see her there. Thank you for coming, I said. We stood together in silence for a moment, the weight of the past hanging between us. I've been working on myself, Eleanor said, her voice hesitant. I've been in therapy. I'm trying to understand why I was so cruel to you. I'm trying to make amends. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw something other than the enemy. I saw a broken person, struggling to heal, just like me. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said, my voice gentle. But I'm willing to try. If you agree. She looked at me, her eyes welling with tears. I am, she whispered. I really am. We walked away from the graveside together, the first steps of a long, uncertain journey. The road ahead was unknown, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced the worst of what the world had to offer, and I had come out the other side, stronger and wiser. I was no longer the girl in the basement. I was Lily Wentworth, and I was finally, truly, free.